Well, you're going to have a blast today because you are going to have the opportunity to have a behind the scenes preview of my conversation with Cara Brookins today on the Self-Employed Life podcast. The actual podcast won't be out for probably at least a couple months, but the cool kids get a little bit of a preview, and that's you because you're here on YouTube. So let's get to it and let's start the podcast. I think there are times in life when we're stuck and we don't even know it. And of course, there are times in life we know we're stuck. But in either case, my conversation today with Cara Brookins is certain to motivate you, inspire you, and get you going. Cara is best known as the woman who built a house with her 4 kids using YouTube how-to videos. Take that in for a moment. After sharing her story in a best-selling memoir, it became an overnight viral media sensation. Now, Cara is a sought-after keynote speaker delivering unconventional advice that inspires action in even the most challenging circumstances. You can find her latest strategies to master productivity, stop procrastinating, and reach your biggest goals in her new book, Unstuck, End Procrastination Using Ancient Psychology Behind How-To Videos. Cara, I'm so excited to have this conversation because it's crazy what you have done with how-to videos.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a crazy journey. I am really happy to be on this side of it and past the building a house stage and into the building a business stage.
So we have to start with the backstory, though, which of course you've recited a million times, but the building of the house. Let's start with the backstory because it took me, honestly, I don't think I've known you for a while, and it really wasn't until I read your book that I really understood that you actually built a house watching how-to videos. I don't think I took it as serious before knowing you that you actually did. So give us the backstory of that.
Yeah, the real physicality of building a house is a lot different than I'm going to build a house and hiring contractors. We physically built a house, a 3,500 square foot 2-story house that I am sitting in right now. And we did the whole thing. We were stuck, and I had 4 kids, 17, 15, 11, and 2, so a toddler on a construction site. And we were in a bad situation. We needed a place to live. We needed to reunite as a family. So I decided to use YouTube videos way back in 2007 when YouTube was brand new to build a house from the ground up, build the foundation by hauling water from my neighbor's pond, raise the walls. I did the plumbing, the sewer, the gas lines, raised the roof. We built a house.
I mean, it's so crazy. I mean, no prior experience.
No.
You literally watched a how-to video on how to build a foundation, and then you built the foundation. And then a video on how to do indoor plumbing, and then you did plumbing. I mean, it's crazy.
And without smartphones. This was
That's right.
pre-smartphone
Yeah.
era. So I had a BlackBerry without a camera and really terrible internet even on the BlackBerry. So this was watching YouTube videos back at the house on the big computer we all shared, making notes on Post-it notes, bringing them out to the construction site and sticking them to things, and asking my 11-year-old, like, "Do you remember how to frame a window?" And then that's how we would try to frame a window. She knew everything about house building that I did. I was a software developer for 20 years, a senior analyst, and I wrote fiction books. So as far away from a construction site guru as you can imagine.
And you also what I love about this is that you unpacked the psychology of these how-to videos, and this is the sort of thing that's right up my alley, right? Because I don't know if you and I have a mutual friend, Andrew Davis, or not.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I saw him give a talk once where he unpacked the psychological sequence of reality television, and in particular,
cool.
Ice Truckers, right, which was a reality TV show where 18-wheelers are crossing frozen ponds. And think about every reality show, whether it's all the HGTV fix-up shows, there is a very specific pattern. And what he unpacked was retention. How do you keep somebody's attention when it's the exact same formula, right? And yet it's actually the formula that creates the retention. It's interesting. And you've done something very similar and equally powerful here, where you have kind of unpacked the psychology of how these how-to videos got you unstuck at a difficult time in life. So we're going to talk about the actual sequence in a moment, but I first want to set up an understanding of how we get stuck. And I've never heard this before. Super cool. You refer to, we find ourselves getting stuck in one of 2 ways, either a sneak attack or a lightning strike. Explain that.
Yeah, the lightning strike, I think, is something we're more familiar with. It's when some major event happens in our life and then we find ourselves stuck. I had been through a really bad domestic violence situation. We all went through it together during COVID, and we had no idea how to pull ourselves out of that. Here we are stuck, our whole world has changed, and we have this massive stuck position. And the other way is this more restless sneak attack where really everything's okay in your life. There should be no valid reason for you to feel stuck, but you do. You start to feel restless, uncertain. You're not sure you are where you should be. And you start to feel like you could do more, you could do better. Maybe you have an idea what the goal is, or maybe you have no idea which direction you wanna go. You just know that right here is not cutting it for you, and that's the restless feeling, and both of those things are kind of rooted in the same feelings, and I wanted to understand how we get there, and then what can we do to get ourselves out? I don't, first of all, want to have to create some kind of lightning strike tragedy in order to motivate myself to get moving, so what can I find that is a common theme for how we feel when we're stuck and the little things that will start to nudge us out of it?
I think the sneak attack is so important right now. I mean, here on the Self-Employed Life, I've done episodes on one episode was titled something along the lines of "You're happy, but you believe you could be happier." Right? Because I think the sneak
Right.
attack is really important right now because that's why I said sometimes you're stuck and you haven't identified as being stuck yet, and yet there's this other restlessness, as you call it. And I think that's particularly pertinent now on the kind of post-pandemic period. I think a lot of people are feeling that way. You say something in the book that, again, kind of an earth-shattering thought, but you refer to that we can't see the obvious solution because modern problems and solutions don't fit neatly into our primitive wiring in our brain. Very interesting as a coach myself for you to explain that there's a way in which, I mean, our brain just operates a certain way, but we're dealing with modern problems. It's sort of like one thing I say often is that our greatest threats are no longer lions and tigers and bears outside of our cage or our cave. However, what's really similar is the fear of competition, the fear of the hits our ego takes because we're comparing ourselves in social media. They're equally as big threats, but they're more modern problems to our primitive brain. How It's such a powerful statement, and I was kind of curious as to how you came to that conclusion, how you saw that yourself.
Well, I think we'd like to think that our brains are so sophisticated that when we have a problem or a fear, that there are a lot of different paths that it could take. Like you could recognize, oh, I'm just afraid of failing and of people laughing at me. Therefore, with that fear, I will go down this path. But if it were a tiger, I would take my brain down an entirely different path. We are not that sophisticated. Our brains take, millennia to develop and change, to the whatever fears we have in front of us, so really it still goes down the same primitive path as if it were the tiger. So we aren't equipped to react differently on the front end unless we can truly see and understand and recognize each of the physical responses, the psychological responses, and the actions, fears that we will feel so that we can then overcome them. Or I think it's really interesting to try to use those primitive responses to spur better modern behavior. Because I think too often when we think, oh, I'm afraid, so I'm responding to the tiger, I have to stop doing that. Well, you're fighting against a primitive response that is really unfightable, and you will constantly fail fighting that. So what if we look at the response that we have in the brain, that primitive response, and we say, okay, when I approach something that I'm afraid of, I have these particular reactions. How can I use them instead of running for the goal? Use the adrenaline rush, use that nervous feeling, use the energy and the neurons that are all firing at a heightened condition right then, and use them instead to reach the goal, to move toward that first step. And it's a really, really small leap to make that change, and you're not fighting against it, you're using it. It was a profound thing for me to see and experience and understand my own brain and, physiology and neurology so that I could then intentionally go after the goals.
Yeah, I think it's so important, and it's something I've really been, as I especially as I'm working on my next book about self doubt. Something I'm very aware of, and I see this very powerfully as a coach, particularly coaching adults, is that it's amazing what shifts when you shed light on something, right? And that to me is what that statement does. And purely pointing out that one of the challenges of getting unstuck is that you're trying to seek modern solutions to modern problems, and you're dealing with a primitive brain, right? And evidence, by the way, for anyone who is looking for evidence of your primitive brain, the mere fact that somebody can give you 9 compliments, 1 constructive criticism, and the only thing you'll remember is the constructive criticism. Why? Because your primitive brain is looking for threats, and that feels like a threat. And I don't know anybody who doesn't fit into that bucket,
Right,
right? It's
right.
your primitive brain in action. Now you can rewire it, but again, I love something I see in coaching my clients all the time is that simply shining the light on something
Right.
does a lot to shift its power, mainly.
Well,
So,
because those most
yeah,
primitive responses we can't rewire.
right.
Like, we can rewire the path we take after they're set off, but we all know when I say, "Have you ever felt stuck?" Everybody has, and the reason everybody has is because we all have the exact same primitive wiring. So we've all been there, and we will all be there again many times. But well, we can't rewire what's happening. We can rewire the next steps. Like, after you're there, how can you use it and move forward?
Exactly, which is exactly what you've done with your breaking down of YouTube how-to videos, the psychology behind it. So we're going to go through this, your process, which you refer to as press your own play button strategy. Okay, so the first step, if you will, in your press your own play button strategy is to set the scene. So go ahead and share more about that.
Well, the first thing that I noticed when I was gonna start building a house is that I had been waking up for months and months and months saying, "I need my life to be better." Right? Like, if I just do better at, like, all the things, then my life will be better. And I tried to do that every day. I tried to do better at absolutely everything. Things were not getting better. You cannot set that kind of a vague goal and expect anything specific to happen. You're not gonna hit a goal that you don't set. So I had watched some random, very silly how-to video about baking a cake. And the first thing they did wasn't get out the eggs and the flour or even mention that they're hungry. The first thing that they did was hold up the finished cake. They made me want it. They made me taste it. So I realized what I have to do is figure out what is that clear, specific goal. I have to set the scene. I have to create this visual in my head. And if you don't visualize in your head, then on paper, on a vision board, in a file, very tactical ways that I can see that finished goal. With a house, it was easy because it's such a physical thing that we could draw a blueprint. We could have swatches of the curtains. We could know the paint color of the wall so that I knew physically what it would feel like to exist in my completed goal. And if your completed goal isn't such a visual, physical thing, you can do the same with a business. I want my business to look like this, so I want my bank account number to be this very specific number. I want my house, my car to be this. So other physical representations of what your goal will bring to you.
Yeah,
So it is
mental
just
hat.
that
Yeah.
clear, I want it, I can taste it. It changes everything once it's
I
clear.
love that I can taste it, and that's exactly. And believe me, for the course of my life, I've heard many ideas about setting this, or visualizing, and all the things. But what you really stress that I think is so important is visioning with a high level of detail, and beyond the details that you can verbalize, like to really step into the feeling of it, and that is the way to really visualize the intangible. Like, what will it feel like? Like, what will that cake taste like? I love, again, this is what I love, that it's so brilliant, the unpacking of the how-to videos, because you're right. I mean, the first thing they do is show you the completed project, right? So you instantly can imagine yourself in the situation where that project is complete, or you're tasting the cake, or um, you can imagine, the people sitting around and really salivating over that cake. You know, the frosting on the lemon bundt cake is glistening and all the things, right? I love that. And I think it's one of the things that you also mentioned in the book that, again, such a different thought is that the more you do that, the more your brain wants to avoid losing what it wants to keep. That, oh my gosh, Kara, that's like such a brilliant thought.
It is so important because
Mhm.
this isn't just some woo-woo, "Oh, picture what you want." Like, this is a
Right.
psychological principle, and, it fits with neuroscience, and we have this loss aversion. Our brain does not like to lose something, whether it's, lose $100 on a walk, you have to gain back twice as much in order to feel like you're at balance again. So, once our brain owns something, you own that $100 in your pocket, you want to keep it.
Your
And the
brain wants
same
you to
your
keep it.
brain wants to keep it.
Right.
Your brain will not let it go. And your brain is primitive, so you don't have to actually own it. You can convince your brain you own it just by visualizing. So the more that you see it, you see yourself living in that house. It isn't just, "I want that house." Your brain believes you already own it, and it will fight twice as hard to keep it in its inventory. I think of this as I talk to teenagers about this like gaming. Gamers have like this inventory of things that they collect as they go through a game. And once that's in your catalog, you don't want to let it go. You want to keep that piece of armor, that gun, that whatever the game is that you're playing, you want to keep that spell. You don't want to let it out of your inventory. And that's how we go through life. I mean, it's works with our primitive brain function. And once you can convince yourself, you write yourself the $3 million check, whatever you want your salary to be, print the bank account balance, put the number on there, hang it on a board. Your brain will fight hard to keep it.
Yeah, it's the most brilliant explanation of why you need to really own this. It's not just a vision board you just slap up and don't look at again. And by the way, as a result of this advice, and again, I have done visioning in all different ways. I created for myself what I call a vision document. It's a Google Doc
Yeah,
because I'm so electronically driven
me
and
too.
I
I do
look
the
at it
same.
all the time, right? So, but it's the words, it's the pictures. I mean, I grabbed screenshots and I grabbed pictures that had meaning to me, and I grabbed pictures that just represented the vision. So it's got skimmability to it. Also, and I can read the words, I can read my vision, but it also has skimmability because there's a lot of
Yes.
power in skimmability to your brain, right? I can just skim
Yes.
those images and my brain sees it and feels it. And then I also have the discipline to look at it several times a day. It's a tab I leave open on my computer, and I just go to it all the time. So, like I said, what you're offering there as the reason you want to really, really see your vision is because your brain will work with you to make sure it doesn't lose it. The best justification I've ever heard of visioning. So, thank you for that. The next step that you saw in these how-to videos. So step number one, the how-to videos, they saw in your case the lemon bundt cake, which looked delicious and it was glistening, and you were salivating and you wanted it. The next step is to take blind action. Like you, in your case, you just got up and did the thing. So explain what blind action means.
It goes right back to what we already talked about in that primitive brain and the way that once you see a fear, once you set this massive goal, and hopefully it is massive because it's easier to hit massive goals than it is to hit small goals. We're more likely to want that massive change.
Wait,
Once
so
you
stay
set
with that for a
that
second. Why is that? That's brilliant. Like we're more
Yeah,
likely to hit massive goals.
I
Why?
mean, how motivated are you for your life to be just a little bit better? Like,
Good point.
no, like, I'm not gonna get up for that. I'm not gonna work hard for that. We are way more likely to hit the big things.
I have to tell you
So
a story on this. So I'm working with a coach recently, and he was pushing me on being, more my authentic self. I think I'm pretty damn authentic,
I think so
but
too.
but he was pushing me, and I have to say, at one point, he got hysterical because I said to him, I said, "Oh, I thought I was done being authentic when I came out at 44 years old." And so he's like, "No, no, your search for authenticity wasn't done when you came out at 44." But I said to him, I said, "Well, my authentic self is who I am today, just cleaned up a little bit." And he's like, "No, no, no." For that same reason, it's kind of like, well, how motivated are you to be more authentic if it's
Right,
you just
right.
cleaned up a little bit? It's the exact
Yeah.
phrase I use. I'm very sarcastic with my coaches. I'm not. I'm probably every coach's nightmare. But I agree with you. Like, how motivated are you for a small vision? Right? It has to be massive.
Now we like a challenge. Our brains are built to like a challenge, to try to climb the mountain. Like it's why we go to space. It's why we do all those things. It's we want that challenge. But that's also scary. Like taking risk is scary, whether it's a physical risk, a psychological risk, a fear of being ostracized. It's scary. So we immediately have this adrenaline rush of fear. It's facing the tiger outside of the cave. But when that happens, we are laser focused in our senses. We can physically actually see better and further. More neurons are firing in our brain in creative ways that fire off new areas. So at that moment, when we set a goal and we feel that fear, that tummy flutter, we are primed to be successful. The problem is our modern reaction to that is, well, I better start planning. Slow down, read the books, write the plans. Let me figure this out. Let me check my finances. Let me get everything in order. Well, when we do that, we lose that adrenaline surge that would have sent us one massive leap forward and fully committed us to the process. So, the solution and what YouTube videos do and successful people throughout history have done is very quickly do a first step. Jump right in and remind yourself no one's going to quiz you, no one's going to test you. Hold up. Like before you do one step, do you know how to do step 507? Like, prove that first. No one's going to ask you that. It's your goal. You get to structure what you do first and how you set it up. Go in, do one step. It gives you more confidence. It locks in the commitment. You have taken ownership in a brand new way. And that feeds right back into the loss aversion. So, all of these things tie together into this perfect formula, and YouTube videos have it. They give you this small, easy step. It's not learn how to make complicated meringue for the top of your pie. It's like, just get out the eggs and flour. Just get the stuff out, crack 1 egg into the bowl. I can do
And
that.
unless you're a nutcase,
I
you
can
don't
do that.
fast forward to the end of the video, right?
No,
You're
no,
literally
no.
blindly following the steps. So, like I said, unless you're a
Absolutely.
nutcase, and then why would you do that? But usually, it is a blind step. It's like step
Right,
number one. I have no idea what step two is, and that's okay. I'm
right.
just doing step one.
Well, and you have the confidence as you move forward that you especially after you do this sort of a method and you recognize that this is a method that you have used many times in your life, and that when you get to step 507, you will have more skills, knowledge, and understanding, confidence, muscle, whatever it is you need to do step 507. You don't have it all yet, and you don't need it all yet. Now, obviously, there has to be some planning. I had to get a loan. I had to, buy land before I could start building a house, but I did all that very quickly.
But the
Once
idea
I
was a
made
blind
that
action,
decision.
right? The idea to do this was just like, oh, I need to build a house.
Absolutely. And then it was within weeks. I had an acre of land and we'd started clearing it within weeks. And then I'm gonna get the construction loan, and I'm gonna keep pushing at that until somebody will give this half crazy person a loan to buy all these supplies.
You know, it's funny. I just had a conversation yesterday with. I was a guest on somebody else's podcast, and we were talking about. And I love a pattern. I love when things come up. Similarly, we were talking about the speed of action and how it increases focus, right? And not that I want to recommend anybody drive crazy on 95 and too fast, but the fact of the matter is, when you're driving excessively fast and you're gripping the steering wheel, you are laser focused, right? You've
Right.
got a lot more on the line. So there is a way in which speed, I even just use a lighter comparison, so just being on a motorcycle, right? It's so much easier to be balanced. It's really hard to be on a motorcycle slow, which is why motorcyclists will zigzag between stop traffic, right?
That's a
Because it's
really g yeah,
really
that's a
hard,
really
right,
good
to be too
image.
slow, right? So
Mhm.
there is something to speed and taking that first blind action to actually narrow your focus and get you honed in on the thing. All right, so now we have set the scene, we've taken the blind action, rewind. Really cool. Tell us about that.
Yeah, the rewind is going back to the first step, and that sounds, like, ridiculously hokey, like, step 1, step 2, repeat. But it is so important to constantly remind yourself what the actual big, clear goal is, and that's you going back and looking at that digital file. And for me, building the house, it was really important because I didn't want to be a house builder. That was not my goal. building the house was one step to reach my goal. So to constantly remind yourself in a very visual and tactile way what that is. And we did it in a really, or I did it in a very strange way building the house. What I wanted to be was a writer. Like that was my goal. I was writing fiction books at the time. Now I have 9 books, 7 are fiction and 2 are nonfiction. And so we're building the house and you keep getting distracted and you even start to think like, hey, I could be a contractor. Like I could do this. Like I could make money building houses and selling them. That was not my goal. It was not my focus. So I made a massive concrete sign. It's sitting out in front of my house right now. We named the house Inkwell Manor. And you cannot run away from a goal that is declared loudly in a concrete sign in front of your house. This would be the inkwell that all of my future books would spring from in this house.
I love that.
And they have. So it is that idea of constantly start every day setting up what is my goal? I want to taste it very clearly. And when you're working on a team, not just the leader needs to do this. Every person on the team should be able to state that goal, should be able to feel that goal, should be able to personally feel the stakes because that motivates a team to keep showing up, keep going. And you would be stunned how often businesses half of the employees have no idea. Like, yeah, our goal this year is to make more than we did last year. No, like tangible, defined, clear, I can taste it kind of goals. Those are the things we work hard for.
And what I took from that is the idea of just really rewinding to your why. And one thing that and for those of you that are watching this on video, are able to see that you're sitting in this beautiful library, and you so beautifully stated in the book, like you're right, your goal was not the house. Your
Right.
goal was to have a library to write future books in, right?
Right.
And it's going back to that, kind of rewinding to the why, rewinding to the scene that you set, rewinding to the document that you, as I did, rewinding back to that. That to me is the real power of that. And then, by the way, what you don't know is I set up our conversation today a while back by doing a Monday coaching break episode, challenging everyone, our listeners, to come up with a physical representation of their scene,
Love it.
like you did with the Inkwell Manor sign. I thought it
Mhm.
was so brilliant because what I took, again, what I took from that idea, and this is what I shared with our listeners some time ago, was it's so big you can't miss it. And I think a
Right.
lot of times we slap post-it notes up on our bathroom mirror, we create a vision board that we don't look at, we create documents we tuck away. What I loved about your enormous concrete sign that always made you rewind to your why is the physicality of it was so
Yes.
big you couldn't miss it. Right. So I even said to somebody, if you're going to create a vision board, put it on an easel and put it in your way where you're going to trip over it. Right.
Exactly.
Create
Yep.
the physicality of it. I'm still working. I haven't quite figured out what physicality I want to add to my scene, but I absolutely love the
Well,
idea.
it holds you accountable too, to
Yes.
yourself first. Every time I pull in my driveway, there's a massive sign.
Yeah.
Every day when I walk the dog, I walk by this sign. Neighbors walking by will ask me about it. So now I'm accountable to other people. And that's really important too, first because you need that extra little nudge. People will say, "How's the latest book going?" You're the writer. Like they know that as I walk down the street because I have this sign. But, more importantly than just that calling you out, people will help you. When you have this massive thing that is reminding them what you're up to, whatever that is, you're working to expand your business into a new area. They may be sitting on a plane next to somebody who lives in that location, and they're like, "Oh, I know somebody who you need to meet." And it is astonishing how much other people will get on board, make the space and time for you to do. Your family members will make more space and time for you to do the thing when you have declared it loudly and, yeah, I mean, bump into it. Make us bonus points if you make something with your own hands.
Mm.
Anything, of course, that we create ourselves, it's kind of an IKEA effect, we give so much more weight to. We consider it to have so much more value. So if you can tangibly create something, even if you're not crafty, you could, get something online. You can design something online, whether it's your shoes that are custom matched to your new book cover or whatever it is, where you can custom create, I don't know, stickers. I've got some right here sitting next to me, that I created so that it's a reminder and that it is, I have more skin in the game because I've put my time and energy
Yeah.
into
And
it.
just make sure it's something you can't ignore, right? Bump
Right.
into it, trip over
Bump
it. Like
into it.
I
Hang it on
love
the
that.
wall.
Yeah, I love that. So then you talk about how we can flourish this process with
Mhm.
kind of special effects, as you refer to them. And I tell you, every one of these special effects, I personally have experienced and know that they're incredibly powerful. Like I love that you're kind of flourishing the idea here. The first one is worst case scenario. How is that helpful?
Oh my goodness. We elevate the risk of the things that we are about to try to do. And again, it's the primitive brain saying tiger, tiger, tiger. It's our automatic response to elevate the risk. So, for example, when the kids and I are building the house, there were every project that we did, we had no idea how to do. So we're constantly just frozen this fear paralysis. I don't know how to make the next step. So we're constantly stuck. And one of the ways that I got us over that quickly moving, was to ask the kids, "What's the worst case scenario? If we try to build this crazy diagonal ceiling here at the top of the stairs and we do it wrong, what's the worst thing that could happen?" And of course, at first, their primitive brains are firing off. You could cut off your left arm, an airplane engine could fall on us. They're throwing out ridiculous things. But when we pared it down to what's the worst thing that is likely to happen to us every single time, it was a small risk. And like 99% of the time, it was, oh, we'd have to do it over. A do-over risk? I will take a do-over risk every day of the week. Like, if I build this wall wrong, I just have to cut it apart and try again. Hand me a saw. Like, that should not hold you back, and we've used that a million times over. Whenever somebody's like, "Oh, I think I wanna move to this new location," one of my kids, or take this new job, but you see them hesitate. Say, "Okay, what's the worst thing that could happen?"
Yeah, I love that as a
Um
strategy. I mean, I've been asked that question, at a really low point in my life, and somebody said,
Mhm.
"Hey, what's the worst case scenario?" And you go down this route, and what you realize when you look at it is like it's survivable.
Right.
Like you're not going to collapse. Your world is not going to chance aren't going to collapse. Even if you were to lose everything financially or what have you, it's survivable, right? So I think it's such a bit. What I really like what you offer is actually using it on a more, not just as dramatic of a situation, but just to get yourself unstuck. I'm stuck on this next step. Well, what's the worst case scenario? I take the step and it doesn't work out, or I take the step and I have to redo it, or I take the step and I lose some money, but not all my money. I think it's an interesting tool to use on a more ongoing basis than I ever thought about before.
Well, and often the worst case scenario is that you'll be right back where you were.
Good point.
And
Yeah.
then by definition, you're already living your worst case scenario. That'll get you moving. When
Yeah,
you
I love
think of
that.
it that way, like, I'm currently living my worst case scenario, it's a whole lot easier to take a step forward.
Yeah. The next flourish, if you will, is the yet principle. And this is spot on. But again, something you encourage people to actually use. Don't just understand the concept, but to actually use it. So explain the yet principle.
Yeah, and this was a mindset I was raised with, so it was super easy for me, and I didn't know until we built the house that not everybody thought this way. I never said, "I can't," or "I don't know how." Ever, ever. It was always like, "I can't do that yet. I don't know how to do that yet. Give me a few minutes and probably a YouTube video, and I will figure it out." And it's just this constant add that, add that. I mean, I think we do that with our kids, but we forget to do that as adults. And constantly people will say, "Well, I could never build a house." Well, of course you could. Trust me, if I could build a house, so could you. It may not be your thing. It may not be the big goal that you take on, but you 100% could. Sure, you don't know how to run a gas line yet. Let me give you this YouTube video. Guarantee you could. And it was life-changing for me to realize not everybody thought that way and to push more people to do that. I don't know how to do it. Well, yet.
Yeah, I
Like,
think that's, like my
build
partner.
the
Yeah,
confidence.
my partner is constantly stuck in technology, scared
Mhm.
of technology, and he always say, "Well, I don't know how to use that. I don't know how to use DoorDash. I don't know." And I was like, "You just don't know how to use it yet." Like I've never said that to him that clearly, but because like you, like that's a puzzling mentality to me. Because I'm like, I just don't know how to use it yet. Like bring
But
on all the
you see people's
technology.
eyes light up, like, say it
Yeah,
out loud when
yeah,
somebody's like, "I don't know, that's not my thing, I don't know how to do that." And I'll say, "Yet?"
yeah.
And they're like, "Oh." I mean, we have
Exactly.
all figured out a million complex things in our lives. From the time we're little bitty, learning how to walk, learning how to use a crayon, learning how to drink from a big girl cup, all of those things that we have learned how to do. And then you add your business and in your life, you've learned to do a million complex things. And the thing in front of you is probably not half as complex as the other things you've already learned how to do. You just don't know how to do it yet.
Love that. So good. All right. So the next is the last person on Earth scenario. So thanks to how is that helpful? Of course, I know how it's helpful. I read your fabulous book, but explain
Oh, this is one of my favorite things. So, my dad would do this to me. I was, especially as a child, I was hesitant to try things. I didn't want people to laugh at me. I always felt small and weak, and it was hard for me to try things. So my dad would push me and be like, "Okay, if you were the last person on earth, could you figure this out?" And it could be anything from spreading peanut butter on bread. I can't do it. I never get it to the edges. The bread will rip. I can't do it. And it is this idea, if you were the last person on earth and in order to survive, you had to spread this peanut butter on the bread, do you think you could do it? Well, of course you could. Of course you could. If you were the last person on earth and in order to survive, you had to figure out how to build a wall out of block, could you do it? Well, of course you could. You would keep trying and you would try unconventional ways until you figured it out. And it sounds like a silly thing, but it does a couple of really important things neurologically and psychologically. First, it engages a little bit of play, right? This kind of apocalyptic last person on earth, and I have to make a peanut butter sandwich. Like that's silly. Like we would really not have to do that in order to survive. So it's a little bit of this playful idea, and we need more of that as adults. And that playful area of your brain is different than the area of your brain that would typically try to logistically figure out complex steps to something. So you're engaging a different part of your brain that will bring different solutions to the table. So there's a lightheartedness to this, a childishness to this, a storytelling mode to this. How would I do it if I were the last person on earth?
And I think also it
Um,
just invites creativity too. I mean, if you're
Absolutely.
so you're feeling stuck, you don't think you can do that thing, but then you think, well, if I was the last person on Earth, could I figure it out, right? So I love the way it actually invites fun,
Yeah.
innovation, creativity. I think it's such a great exercise. And then your last flourish, your last special effect is one I live by, and I'm glad you're here to suggest it to everybody else, is the quit early effect.
Yeah.
Explain that.
Yeah. This is based on a psychological principle of we remember things better that are interrupted. It was a Russian psychologist who first kind of discovered this principle or observed it in like waitresses. They come to the table and take 12 people's order without writing it down and walk away and bring it back to the table. How do they remember that? And she went into the exploration of how they remember this and found something unexpected. They didn't remember it after the food was delivered. Poof, gone. They only remembered while the task was interrupted until the food was there. So the way that I choose to use this, again, like I want to use those psychological principles for me instead of let them work against me. So the idea is to quit early, quit before you're finished. So you already have a motivating factor to pull you back in. If you quit doing a puzzle when you have 3 pieces of puzzle left on the table, it will drive you nuts and you will think about it. It nags at you. You will not be stuck the next morning when you get up and go back to the puzzle. You know exactly what you're going to do. You're going to put those puzzle pieces in place.
Well, think
And
about
that's
binge watching Netflix, right? Think about how
right.
hard it is to
To
stop
stop.
when you keep
Right.
yourself up to 2 o'clock in the morning. Or if you do force yourself to stop, how eager you are to get back to it. Like there's a
Right.
whole, and I think it actually does tap again back into that primitive brain because our primitive brain likes closure. Our primitive
Right.
brain wants to
Well,
close
and
the
it's
gap.
not just like, "Oh, we like the way it feels," like, it is an actual chemical
Right.
release. When we complete the project, we're completing it to get that little kick of dopamine. You've completed the project, here's your reward. We want that reward. So, sometimes it's necessary to finish that because we need that, but learn when it's more beneficial for you to interrupt it. Do you have trouble getting started after lunch? Do you have trouble getting back into things in the morning? Are you about to have to start a really difficult part of the project and you're wrapping up an easier one? Well, instead of wrapping up your day with that dopamine hit, where say we're painting a dining room wall and we leave one wall unpainted because the next day I know I have to do a bunch of complex electrical wiring that I'm gonna procrastinate, leave that one wall unpainted so the next day when I come back, I finish that wall, massive dopamine release that makes me feel great, it gives me more confidence, it gives me more focus. Now, I'm already started. I'm not starting, I'm already moving, and I have that chemical release to push me into the more complex wiring that otherwise I would have come out here and, like, spent 5 hours cleaning the floors or something to avoid.
Yeah.
So,
I think some
use
of the best
the way it
advice,
works.
how I've been able to apply this, some of the best advice I got as a writer was to never end at a chapter. Don't
Yes.
ever end at the end of a chapter. Know you're close to it, but then stop yourself because your brain can't let it go. Like when
Right.
I do that for the remainder of until the next day when I'm writing again, my brain has already tried closing that gap. I've already written in my brain, I've
Perfect
already written the
example.
rest of the chapter. And to the point you made a second ago, when you finish that chapter, you begin the next one, there's a natural segue. It's really hard to begin a new chapter when you've closed the previous one. And I actually think it shows up in the writing. I think your writing ends up feeling compartmentalized as opposed to a flow. And I will say, I even did the same thing as a photographer, that I never, I made sure I always left my shoots feeling like I didn't get to try everything I wanted to do, so that the next session I would be able to try something new. But I was always, because believe it, the compulsion was I want to do all the things and all the different settings and all the compositions, but I always made sure that I didn't let myself actually get everything done that I wanted to, so that the next session I could play from that.
Yeah, it's a brilliant way to use your mind to succeed, and, even, like, with writing, you never want to give a person a place to put a bookmark. The end of a chapter shouldn't be a place for a bookmark. It should lead into the next. It should tease the next, so you're pulling someone forward, and if you are writing to closure like that, then there's a place to put a bookmark at the end of every chapter. You wanna pull people through. You're not giving them the full dopamine release they want at the end of that chapter, you're teasing it into the next.
So we
Yeah, I
should
mean,
end this episode right
cliffhangers.
now, or so
Right.
leaving it
Yeah.
hanging. We're not going to. We're not going to.
It's a
You actually,
cliffhanger, it's a
yeah,
cliffhanger,
exactly.
and, that's what Hollywood learned how to use that same exact chemical reaction in our brain against us.
Yeah, perfect. And you say actually something pretty early in the book, but I know this resonates so much for us self-employed business owners that it's just so powerful. And I'm going to quote directly from the book. And this is the quote: I have ridden the roller coaster of optimism, followed by the crushing thought that maybe I just didn't have it in me after all, many times. I mean, that just
Yep.
hit, like, we all know that feeling, right? We
Mhm.
all, I mean, you talk about the epitome of being stuck. And this to me is the problem as business owners when we take
Mhm.
repetitive hits of disappointment, repetitive hits of trying to. It's why as a coach, I feel like I feel like often as a coach that I'm in the business of intervention. Because I'm trying to intervene. It's why I focus in our Self-Employed Business Institute. We focus on students that have been in business between like 2 and 5 years. I want to intervene before they've had so many hits and they've worked so hard and not gotten the results that they lose steam. And
Yeah.
we're humans. You can only stick with the challenges for 5 years or so before you drain your money, you drain your energy, and you just don't. And then I feel like the world loses your amazing gifts.
Yeah, you lose your confidence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I wanted to share that and then get more of your insights. I think it's such a powerful relative sharing that you offer in the book, that that feeling and has a lot
Yeah.
to do with being stuck.
Right. Well, you have to be an expert in being stuck before you can become an expert in getting unstuck.
Unstuck.
And that's what I wanted to understand. I wanted to understand I was in a low place for a really long time before I started building the house, before I made that move, right? Like, it didn't just, oh, bad things happened and I immediately jumped in and did this. Like, I was stuck for a long time. And not just then, like, many times since, I have been stuck. So what is the thing that is the switch? What is the thing that made me take a move? And then looking throughout history, and I tell stories throughout the book that are people, from a long time ago to more recent history, that what made them make a move? And, so often those stories are told from this lightning strike perspective. Somebody went through something tough. Well, none of us want to go through something tough in order to achieve something. Like that can't be the solution. Like creating a bad situation for ourselves, jumping off a bridge in order to figure out how to, build our own wings. Like that cannot be the solution. But and neither can finding a how-to video for everything I want to do in life. Like that can't be the solution either. You can't just rely on that. So I wanted to understand what made me feel stuck and then what made the switch from an outside perspective. And once I understood what outside actions could make me take a step, then I could create it for myself anytime I wanted. So if I fully understand this process of moving, I can go from that crushing self-doubt, that loss of confidence that we've all felt, and I can say, "Okay, I've succeeded before. And other people have succeeded before on an even greater scale. I know ordinary people can do extraordinary things. I know that for sure. And I know I am at least half as capable as other people. So I can find a way to set up a system that has been proven by other people. I didn't create the system. I observed the system and identified it historically and then how it was highlighted and easy to understand in how-to videos. And now I can go from that crushing self-doubt to success anytime I want by following this strategy.
And with the gift to the world, honestly, in you're doing this and making these
Thank you.
observations is the speed at which people can now get unstuck. There's a formula,
Right.
there's a pathway, there's tools, there's ideas. And to me, the speed at which you become unstuck, particularly for high achievers, right? And my book about self doubt is very specific for high achievers, not the person stuck on the couch, but the
Right.
person who's out there wanting to do big things. And this damn thing called self doubt shows up, slows them down, causes them to pause. You know, those are the ones who I believe our audiences are all high achievers. And, a big part of your goal here is to get unstuck as quickly as possible so that you can do
Yes.
the big things. Because, and, again, as a guest on a podcast yesterday, we got talking about, I said, it's kind of speed. And I think it's more important now because we need quick solutions in this world. We don't have forever to figure out these things, whether it's
I agree.
social divide, climate change. Like we don't have forever to figure these things out.
We are at a
Let's
tipping point, it feels like, on so many different levels right now that we need, people who have the ambition, who have the vision to come forward quickly and enact things quickly. I agree.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, so good. Kara, it's a fantastic book. But before I let you go, we want to know what's one thing about you that says everything about you.
I believe I can do absolutely anything I set my mind to, and I believe you can.
Love it. And you are great evidence that that is the case. So just fantastic. So, Kara, tell us what's the best way to find out more about you, your work, and of course, your book.
Everything is on my website, carabrookins.com, and you can get to all the socials, books, speaking, everything from there.
Excellent. And of course, we'll make sure that link is available on our show notes as
Thank
well
you.
at jeffreyshaw.com. Highly recommend this book. I said to Kara pre hopping on the mic that it's truly one of the best books I've read in a long time. And I had the chance to read some really fabulous books, but this is beautifully told with storytelling. It's engaging and you can apply it, right? And that makes it so valuable. So Kara, can't thank you enough for being here. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.
And remember, you might be in business for yourself, but you are not in business by yourself. Be your best self, be proud, and keep changing the world.